Two sisters tortured a man for 4 months. They even raped him. From chains to adult diapers, their abuse was as unique as it was cruel. The case marked the first time a woman had been charged with rape in Spokane, Washington. It dismantled stereotypes and defied conventional ideas on what rape was and what women were capable of doing. What you're about to hear is vile and beyond the scope of your traditional true crime podcast. Season 2, Women Who Rape, begins with a story you've never heard about and two names you won't be able to soon forget: Theresa Spickler-Bowe and Diane Eickoff. 2 women, 1 man, chains, beatings, and rape. That's coming up on Ladies Love Crime. Graphic content warning. The following contains material that may be harmful or traumatizing to some audiences. The year was 1997. While President Clinton was having a torrid affair with Monica Lewinsky, a couple of depraved women in Spokane, Washington were engaging in their own sex scandal. Except their scandal wasn't a sleazy affair. It was a brutal and long-term torture and rape. Meet Ron Vega. He was a 41-year-old man who worked as a toll booth collector. He lived in New Jersey with his longtime girlfriend / common-law wife, 36-year-old Diane Eunice Eickoff. Diane was close friends with her sister, a woman named Theresa Spickler-Bowe. Little did Ron know that these 2 women would be so evil that they would perpetuate unspeakable acts on him. Theresa and her husband Bill decided to move west to Spokane. Diane was looking for more out of her life and decided to go with her sister, even without Ron. Although reticent about starting over, Ron didn't want to lose Diane and decided to go along. Theresa wasn't too keen on Ron coming with them. However, she acquiesced to the idea and decided that Ron and Diane could live with her and her husband, Bill. The foursome began living in a cheap, ground-level, 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment. Things seemed okay at first, but after 4 months of living together, Theresa started making things difficult. Theresa claimed to have had a bad back that kept her from working. She also slept in the living room because she said the couch was more comfortable for her. She wanted the 2nd bedroom left empty for storage and laundry, so she made Ron and Diane sleep on the living room floor. Theresa declared that Ron and Diane would not be mooching off of her and must get jobs. She also told Diane that together they would have to make sure that Ron acted right. The neighbors thought the women were nice, but found Ron shy. Some even questioned whether he was mentally retarded because of how submissive he was to both Theresa and Diane. Before long, Theresa started getting more controlling. Ron and Diane were both working 2 jobs, only after Theresa gave her approval for each of those jobs. But it still wasn't good enough for Theresa. She demanded that Ron do landscape and repairs around the apartment so she could get a lower price on the rent. Even after all of this, Theresa moaned that the pair were mooching. Both Theresa and Diane started giving Ron instruction on everything he had to do for them. They told him when to work, when to come home, where to deposit his paychecks, where to buy groceries, what errands to run, etc. Theresa was inconvenienced by him sleeping on the living room floor and told him he had to sleep on the kitchen floor. For whatever reason, he complied with all of this. Neighbors started noticing that things were weird. They stopped visiting. One neighbor said he even had to wear earplugs to tune out all the yelling and screaming he could hear coming from their apartment. Behind those screams, unspeakable acts were taking place, but Theresa and Diane were only getting started. At this point, their bossiness took a dark turn. It was open season on Ron, and what he came to endure is not just abusive, it's cruel and unusual. Investigators said that the women, quote, inflicted substantial bodily harm, which by design caused such pain and agony as to be the equivalent of that produced by torture. The women controlled Ron's money, and Diane would tell him all the time that he couldn't survive without them. He was forced to shovel snow barefoot and in a diaper with a dog chain attached to him. If they didn't like how he shoveled, he would be forced to stay out on the porch in the snow wearing nothing but that homemade diaper. Even when he just farted, they would put him outside in the cold with a diaper. He had to take the trash out in the snow barefoot as well. At first, they took his sleeping bag away and only let him have blankets. Then he was forced to sleep in just his underwear or completely naked on the kitchen floor. The women controlled his food intake and gave him small, child-sized portions. Other times, they would force-feed him. If he burped or passed gas when eating, they would hit him and take his food. Sometimes, they would throw his food on the floor and make him eat it with his hands or lick it up like a dog. If they caught him sneaking food, the women would make him gorge himself until he vomited. And had access to food, if they found out he ate anything, he would receive a punishment. Really, anything they didn't like could elicit physical abuse. For instance, they would jump on his legs just to punish him. When he got home from work, his girlfriend Diane would chain him to her waist. He wasn't allowed to move unless one of the women told him he could. Ron's bathroom privileges were restricted, and he was only allowed cold showers. He was forced to wear a homemade diaper, and if he soiled it, they would burn him. While it seems odd that a couple of women could inflict so much damage on a man, it's important to understand how this was physically possible. Diane was petite and only about 115 pounds. So was Ron. He stood about 5'8" and was only 170 pounds. However, Theresa was much larger. She was about 5'4", big-boned, and weighed about 250 pounds. Ron didn't have much of a chance to physically fight back. Not only was Theresa twice his size, but she had a helper in Diane. Ron was simply outnumbered and outsized. At times, they would hold a knife to his throat and threaten to kill him if he called the police. Theresa and Diane would take knives and spatulas, heat them over the stove, and then press them in his chest and buttocks. Another of Ron's punishments for not following the rules was holding a rake above his head for long periods of time. One day, after he failed to keep it up, the women bent him over and jammed the end of the rake up his anus so forcefully that it caused internal lacerations. One night, they took turns raping him every 15 minutes. No one is sure how many times the rapes happened. However, one night it did serve as his escape. After sodomizing him, they forced him to drink alcohol. They poured wine all over him and then kicked him out of the apartment when he got drunk. He stumbled over to a local center for addicts and alcoholics. He fell asleep on their couch, and when he wouldn't wake up, the volunteers called the police. He was bleeding from the head. The officers thought he had fallen down while drinking, and that's what caused his injuries. However, he began muttering about burns, and they asked him what he meant. He pulled down his shirt and showed them all the knife and spatula burns on his body. Ron suffered a lot of damage. In addition to his second and third degree burns, Ron had a broken nose, cheekbone, and ribs. He was covered in purple bruises. He was frail and emaciated, weighing just 116 pounds. The months-long torture had stripped away nearly 60 pounds off his body. The neighbors saw him in the snow with a dog chain and saw him walking barefoot. The one neighbor heard those loud screams that caused him to have to wear earplugs. His co-workers noted that they saw a change in Ron, saying he was withdrawn and made no eye contact. However, not one of them ever thought to call the police. It didn't take long for police to figure out who was torturing Ron. Diane was arrested and charged with second-degree assault and second-degree rape. She quickly fessed up to everything and started shifting blame. Although she participated in what happened, she says Theresa was the chief aggressor in the worst forms of abuse. Diane said she too was a victim of Theresa's anger. Theresa was originally just charged with second-degree assault and bonded out of jail. They added the charge of second-degree rape and got worried that Theresa would flee. Soon, police learned that Theresa was selling her 1981 Oldsmobile Omega to buy airline tickets, so she could, indeed, skip town. Before long, however, they picked her up. Theresa's husband, Bill, was also arrested and charged with second-degree assault for not reporting the abuse. However, eventually the charges were dropped against him. He claimed that since he was rarely at home, that he didn't know about the torture and abuse the women were unloading on Ron. The trial fleshed out every painful detail, from the diapers to the beatings to the broomstick rape. Emergency room doctor James Nannett testified about treating Ron's injuries. He claimed that in his 18 years of treating emergency room patients, the only people that came in worse shape were car accident victims. He went on to say, quote, "It would be easier for me to diagram the areas he didn't have injuries than where he did." Ron took the stand and told the jury how Theresa turned his life into, quote, "a living hell." Although he worked 2 jobs, slept on the kitchen floor, and let Theresa take his paychecks, it just wasn't enough. Ron lamented, quote, "If I didn't do what she wanted, there would be punishment." Ron says that his girlfriend Diane started slapping him within weeks of moving into the apartment. He noted how this was out of her character, as they'd been together for 12 years and she had never been violent with him before. In fact, he described what sounded like a fairly normal relationship up until the abuse began, saying, quote, "We had fun together." He told the courtroom that, quote, "nothing happened until we moved in." Like Diane, he pointed the finger at Theresa, saying, quote, "It was mostly her idea." Ron noted that Theresa went back to New Jersey for about a month, and when she did, Diane wasn't violent when it was just the 2 of them. Nevertheless, Theresa's ideas were very weird. He described how Theresa started chaining him to the front door at night. She also made him crawl on all 4s because he made too much noise. Given that he was constantly punished for his actions, Ron was asked what he did to get raped. According to the local paper, he just shrugged, looked away, and said, quote, "I must have done something." The million-dollar question is why he stayed. What made him stick around and get tortured for 4 months? Again, Ron didn't have an answer, saying, quote, "I don't know why I didn't go. I wish I had." Ron's story matched up with Diane's testimony. However, Theresa wasn't going to cave that easily. She denied everything. When the prosecutor detailed all the beatings Ron endured, Theresa replied by saying, quote, "I never saw that, and I don't recall." And the burns on his body, she claimed, were all Diane's doing. Theresa says she walked into the apartment one day to Diane holding a hot spatula to Ron's butt and chest. Theresa said, quote, "I was dumbfounded. I couldn't believe she didn't care that she burned that boy." Although she considered it, she decided not to call the police. Instead, she turned the tables on Ron, saying that he beat her so hard one time she couldn't even move her neck for 3 days. She claimed Ron was an ugly drunk and abusive to Diane. She says she tried to convince her sister to leave him behind in New Jersey, but he followed her. When he arrived, both Ron and Diane began fighting and hitting each other. Theresa told the jury he was a liar. She painted herself as the victim and as a caring companion, crying as she said, quote, "I would never hurt the man. We had a unique friendship." The prosecutor had the broomstick Ron was raped with that contained feces and hair. He had testimony from coworkers that talked about Ron's change in behavior. Neighbors talked about seeing Ron in a diaper outside in the cold. He even had the chain that Diane attached to Ron. But he's still worried about the perception. Would the jury buy that a woman could rape a man? It definitely was something worth considering. The local paper, The Spokesman, published an article during the trial titled "Rape with a Different Gender." It grappled with the idea of how a man could become a victim of sexual assault. The article brought what was likely a new term to the citizens of Spokane in the 90s, battered man syndrome. Carolyn Morrison, director of the YWCA domestic violence shelter in the town, told the paper, quote, "We know victims of domestic violence don't run away because the chains that bind them are in their mind." The article went on to lay out how a male rape victim shouldn't be viewed any differently than a female rape victim. Take a listen to an excerpt from that article. Male victims, like their female counterparts, are often abused as children and have abnormal views of love, according to Herb Robinson, a Spokane mental health counselor who has studied the phenomenon. Because of low self-esteem, they accept verbal and physical abuse. What I'm hearing is, I would never call police on her because she has him on a delicate emotional umbilical cord, Robinson said. For that reason, battered men don't use their physical advantage, said Robinson. Their spouses have brainwashed them into believing that no other woman will have them and that no one would believe their story of abuse. The prosecutor didn't think the jury would grasp this on their own. In fact, he was quite concerned about sexism, feeling that jurors would never buy that a man could be raped. He jokingly referred to these people as the beehive hairdo ladies. He had all the physical evidence, yet Ron couldn't remember everything because of the trauma. The memory lapse was common for what he had experienced, but in the minds of the jurors, not being able to remember who did what when would likely only complicate sexist attitudes about female-on-male rape. To compensate for this, he went as far as having a local expert on male domestic violence victims testify. Spokane County Superior Court Judge Greg Seipold was so appalled at what he heard in the trial that he went beyond the normal maximum sentence of the crime of 12 years. Instead, he sentenced Theresa to 20 years in prison. He also banned contact between Theresa and Diane for life, noting how their crimes were of, quote, deliberate and senseless cruelty. Diane's attorney, Doug Bowe, argued for leniency because she had remorse, pled guilty, and testified against Theresa. The judge wasn't buying it, saying, quote, this was cruelty that went on in time, in number of incidents and intensity. Theresa is serving her sentence at Women's Correctional Facility in Purdy, Washington, and should be released in 2027. Diane was to be sent to prison in California to be near a cousin. Most importantly, to keep her away from Theresa. Diane's attorney said she found God while incarcerated and is remorseful. After the trial, she said, quote, the victim and I spent 12 years together. We loved each other. I am truly sorry for what has happened to him. With the will of God, I hope he can have some compassion for my part in this action. After the trial, Ron went back to his original job as an attendant on the New Jersey Turnpike.